Sit down. Are you deaf or just stupid? Judge Arthur Pierce doesn't even look up from his papers when he barks the command. The words sliced through the courtroom like a whip crack. Damon Hayes, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, remains standing. Pierce's head snaps up, his pale face flushing red. He slams his gavel so hard it echoes off the marble walls. Typical. Probably can't even read the charges against you. Damon slowly takes his seat, spine straight, eyes forward. His leather briefcase rests beside him, gold initials DH gleaming under the harsh lights. Reckless endangerment, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, Pierce's voice drips venom. 60 days in the county jail. Next time, maybe you'll think twice before acting like you own the place. The sentence lands like a sledgehammer. Have you ever seen someone's world flip upside down in 60 seconds? What happens next will leave you speechless. Judge Arthur Pierce built his reputation on one simple principle. The law meant order, and order meant knowing your place. For 15 years, his courtroom had been a monument to that philosophy. The mahogany-paneled walls bore witness to his unwavering commitment to what he called practical justice. Justice isn't about feelings, Pierce would tell new clerks, settling into his high-backed leather chair like a king on his throne. It's about maintaining the natural order of society. Some people understand respect, others need to be taught. The statistics spoke volumes, though no one dared speak them aloud. When Kevin Jones appeared before him for assault charges, 18 months in county jail. When Evan Miller faced identical charges just 3 weeks later, 6 months probation and community service. The difference? Kevin was black, Evan was white. But Pierce would call it considering character and background. Look at the defendant's history, Pierce would intone during sentencing, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Look at where they come from. Look at their associations. The pause before associations always lingered, heavy with unspoken meaning. His colleagues at the monthly judicial conference would nod approvingly. Pierce is tough but fair, they'd say over expensive scotch at the country club. Doesn't let them get away with anything. That's why his district stays so peaceful. The truth was uglier. Much uglier. When Maya Brooks, a young black attorney, tried to object during a domestic violence hearing, Pierce had silenced her with surgical precision. Counselor, perhaps you should focus on learning proper courtroom procedure before attempting to lecture this court. His tone suggested she was a child playing dress-up in her grandmother's clothes. Maya's white colleague, Carlos Garcia, made the exact same objection 15 minutes later. Pierce's response? Sustained. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, Counselor. The pattern repeated itself, courtroom after courtroom, case after case. Black defendants received sentences 30 to 40% harsher than their white counterparts for identical crimes. Black attorneys found their motions dismissed with barely a glance. Black families in the gallery were warned about disruptions for reactions that white families displayed without consequence. But Pierce was careful, brilliant even. He never used slurs, never made overtly racist statements on the record. Instead, he weaponized respectability politics and coded language with the precision of a surgeon. This defendant clearly lacks the moral foundation necessary for rehabilitation, he would declare when sentencing young black men. For young white men with identical records, this appears to be an unfortunate lapse in judgment. I'm confident this young man can learn from his mistakes. The media loved him. Judge Pierce. Tough on crime, strong on values, read the headline in the State Tribune when his name surfaced for appellate court consideration. The article painted him as a no-nonsense jurist who didn't let political correctness interfere with justice. What the article didn't mention were the hushed conversations in courthouse bathrooms, the worried whispers among public defenders, the way black court reporters requested transfers to other divisions. "He's got it out for us," Frank Miller, a veteran public defender, confided to his colleague after Pierce sentenced his 18-year-old client to 2 years for marijuana possession. "Same amount of weed. White kid from the suburbs gets diverted to rehab. My kid gets prison." But Miller, like everyone else, kept his voice down. Pierce wielded power like a medieval lord. Cross him, and suddenly your motions took longer to process. Your clients found themselves with harsher bail conditions. Your professional life became a minefield of bureaucratic obstacles. The breaking point should have come during the Bell case. Jordan Bell, 23, college graduate, no prior record, caught with a small amount of cocaine during a traffic stop. The prosecution recommended probation and community service. "Mr. Bell," Pierce had announced, his voice echoing through the packed courtroom, "you had every opportunity to make something of yourself. Instead, you chose the easy path of criminality that too many in your community seem to prefer." Jordan's mother gasped audibly from the gallery. Pierce's gavel struck like lightning. "Ma'am, control yourself or remove yourself from my courtroom." 2 years in state prison. Perhaps that will provide the discipline you clearly lacked at home. The same week, Chad Peterson faced identical charges. Same amount of drugs, same circumstances, same prosecutor recommending probation. "Mr. Peterson, this clearly represents poor judgment during a difficult period in your life. 6 months probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. Don't waste this opportunity." The disparity was staggering, but who would challenge it? Pierce's reputation for maintaining order made him untouchable. Appeals were routinely denied. Complaints to the Judicial Oversight Board disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Behind closed doors, Pierce's mask slipped completely. "These people think they can waltz into my courtroom and demand special treatment," he told his law clerk during a private chambers conference. "My grandfather didn't fight in World War II, so these criminals could lecture me about fairness." His secretary, Sophia Rossi, quietly documented everything. Not because she planned to expose him, but because she'd learned that survival in Pierce's domain required careful notes. He fired assistants who didn't understand the importance of supporting judicial authority. The promotion to appellate court seemed inevitable. Pierce's conviction rate spoke for itself. His sentences were rarely overturned on appeal. The legal establishment saw him as exactly what the system needed: unwavering, uncompromising, unafraid to make tough decisions. What they didn't see were the families torn apart by his sentencing disparities, the young men who emerged from prison hardened and hopeless, the attorneys who stopped taking cases in his district, the slow but steady erosion of trust in a system that preached equality while practicing prejudice. 3 months before that fateful traffic stop, Pierce received unofficial confirmation that the appellate nomination was his. He celebrated with his usual circle at the country club, accepting congratulations on his distinguished career of public service. "Arthur's exactly what this state needs," proclaimed Senator Thompson, raising his glass. "Someone who understands that compassion without accountability isn't justice at all." The irony was lost on everyone present. In Pierce's world, accountability flowed in only one direction. But power, even judicial power, has limits. And sometimes those limits arrive in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes they arrive carrying a briefcase with the initials DH. Sometimes they arrive wearing an expensive suit and maintaining perfect composure while absorbing insults designed to break their spirit. Sometimes justice arrives disguised as the very thing you've spent your career trying to destroy. Judge Arthur Pierce was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The state attorney's office on 7th Street hummed with controlled chaos at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning. Young prosecutors clutched coffee cups like lifelines. Paralegals wheeled document boxes through marble corridors, and phones rang with the relentless urgency of justice. Delayed. Damon Hayes walked through the main entrance with the measured pace of someone who owned the building, which, in many ways, he did. "Excuse me," called Jessica Chen, the new victim services coordinator, intercepting him at the security desk. "Sir, if you're here to file a complaint, you'll need to take the elevator to the 3rd floor." Damon paused, studying her with calm eyes. "Thank you, Miss Chen. I'll find my way." The security guard, Mike Alvarez, looked up from his newspaper and did a double-take. "Morning, sir," he said, suddenly straightening his posture. "Didn't expect to see you this early." Jessica's face flushed crimson. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize—" "No apology necessary," Damon replied smoothly. "Happens more often than you'd think." He continued toward the elevator bank, his Italian leather briefcase swinging slightly with each step. Behind him, he heard Mike explaining in hushed tones. "That's Damon Hayes, lead prosecutor. Been here longer than most of the judges." The elevator doors closed on Jessica's mortified expression. On the 5th floor, the atmosphere changed immediately. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Assistants looked up from their keyboards. The energy in the room shifted like a tide recognizing its moon. "Morning, boss," called out Leah Cohen, his senior deputy, barely glancing up from a stack of case files. "The Pierce materials are on your desk. Statistical analysis came in at midnight. It's comprehensive." Damon nodded, continuing to his corner office. Through the glass walls, he could see his team had been busy. Charts and graphs covered every available surface. Bankers' boxes lined the walls like soldiers in formation. Inside his office, the scope of the investigation revealed itself. 15 years of sentencing data organized by race, crime type, and outcome. The pattern wasn't subtle. It was surgical. His phone buzzed. "Hayes. Damon, it's Paul Evans at Statistical Services. You need to see these numbers. I ran the analysis 3 times because I couldn't believe the disparity." "How bad?" 42% harsher sentences for black defendants compared to white defendants with identical charges and criminal histories. In some categories, it's over 60%. I've never seen anything like this. Damon made a note. "Send everything to my secure email. And Paul, this stays between us until I give you the green light." "Of course. But Damon, this is going to destroy careers." "That's the point." After hanging up, Damon opened his laptop and pulled up the official state attorney database. His clearance level allowed access to sealed records, judicial performance reviews, and disciplinary complaints. 3 hours later, he had what he needed. Judge Arthur Pierce wasn't just biased. He was systematically, methodically, brilliantly biased. His assistant knocked softly. "Sir, Frank Miller is here about the Andrews case." "Send him in." Frank Miller entered, closing the door behind him. "Damon, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, the Pierce situation. Maybe we should involve the Federal Civil Rights Division before—" "No." Damon's voice was quiet but absolute. "This stays state level. We handle our own house. But if we're talking about systematic civil rights violations— Frank, how many cases have you tried in Pierce's courtroom?" "Maybe 24 over the years." "Why?" Damon turned his computer screen toward him. "Because according to this data, your black clients received sentences averaging 38% harsher than your white clients for comparable crimes." Frank's face went pale. "Jesus Christ. It's not your fault. He's been playing this game for 15 years and he's very good at it. But that ends now. What's your plan?" Damon stood and walked to the window, looking down at the courthouse across the street. From this angle, he could see Pierce's chambers on the 4th floor. "The plan is evidence," Overwhelming, undeniable, bulletproof evidence. But there's one piece missing. What's that? Personal experience. Every defense attorney in the city has stories about Pierce's bias, but they're all hearsay. What we need is a prosecutor experiencing it firsthand. Frank frowned. How do you arrange that? It's not like you can just walk into his courtroom and... He stopped. Damon, no. Tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Damon smiled for the first time that morning. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to become the prey. You're talking about deliberately getting yourself arrested? Getting a criminal charge just to appear before Pierce? I'm talking about providing the final piece of evidence that will end his career. That's insane. If this goes wrong, if anyone finds out you orchestrated it, then I lose my job. But if I don't do this, how many more Kevin Jones cases will happen? How many more Jordan Bells get 2 years for what Chad Peterson gets probation? The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic 5 floors below. Finally, Frank spoke. What do you need from me? Complete deniability. When this happens, you know nothing. Your shock has to be genuine. And the rest of the team, same thing. The fewer people who know, the better. Damon returned to his desk and opened a different file. There's something else. My brother Andre got pulled over in Pierce's district last month. Speeding ticket, but the officer noted aggressive behavior and failure to comply with lawful orders. Those are misdemeanors that could easily be upgraded to... Exactly. All I need is the right traffic stop in the right jurisdiction. Frank shook his head. You're putting your entire career on the line. My career doesn't matter if the system is broken. And Frank, it's not just broken. It's been weaponized. After Frank left, Damon sat alone in his office, studying the wall of evidence he'd assembled. 15 years of systematic injustice, documented with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. His phone buzzed with a text message. Meeting with Appellate Nomination Committee moved to next week. Congratulations in advance. Senator Thompson? Damon smiled grimly. Pierce's promotion timeline just became his deadline. Justice, he reflected, required perfect timing. The law degree from Harvard Law hung on the wall like a certificate of war. Next to it, Yale's Master of Laws diploma caught the amber glow of the desk lamp. Below both, 3 Prosecutor of the Year awards gleamed in polished frames, their gold lettering a testament to 15 years of relentless pursuit of justice. But tonight, Damon Hayes wasn't thinking about accolades. He was thinking about Andre. His younger brother's voice still echoed in his mind from that phone call 3 weeks ago. Damon, I need a lawyer, a good one. This white cop, man. He was looking for a reason. The traffic stop had been textbook harassment. Andre, driving his new BMW through Pierce's district after a client meeting, pulled over for allegedly weaving between lanes. The officer's report painted a picture of an aggressive, uncooperative black male who appeared to be reaching for something and failed to immediately comply with lawful orders. Damon knew the script by heart. He'd seen it play out in Pierce's courtroom dozens of times. What made it worse was Andre's impeccable record. MBA from Wharton, senior vice president at a major financial firm, married father of 2, active in his church, never so much as a parking ticket. The perfect defendant to prove that none of those things mattered when you stood before Judge Arthur Pierce. Damon opened his laptop and pulled up the case management system. Andre's hearing was scheduled for next Thursday. Routine traffic violations, but the resisting arrest charge elevated it to Pierce's jurisdiction. Baby brother always was too trusting, Damon muttered, scrolling through similar cases. The pattern was always the same. Black professionals thinking their credentials would protect them. Black families believing the system would recognize their dignity. They learned otherwise in Pierce's courtroom. His home office had become a war room. 3 bankers' boxes contained 15 years of meticulously organized case files. Sentencing disparities arranged by crime type, defendant race, and attorney representation. The statistical evidence was overwhelming, but statistics never told the human story. Damon pulled out a red folder marked Personal Impact. Inside were letters from families whose lives Pierce had destroyed, photos of young men who entered his courtroom with hope and left with felony convictions that would follow them forever. Jordan Bell's mother had written, "Judge Pierce looked at my son like he was garbage. 2 years in prison for something that white boy got probation for. Same crime, same amount of drugs. But my Jordan didn't have the right skin color." Damon's phone buzzed. A text from his wife. "Working late again? Dinner's getting cold?" He typed back, "Almost finished. Save me a plate." But he wasn't almost finished. He was just beginning. The plan crystallized as he studied his calendar. Thursday morning, Andre's hearing. Thursday afternoon, the appellate nomination committee meeting where Pierce's promotion would be fast-tracked. Perfect timing. Damon opened a secure folder on his laptop labeled Operation Evidence. Inside were detailed profiles of every prosecutor in his office, their caseloads, their availability, their likelihood to be assigned emergency cases. What he needed was simple. Get arrested in Pierce's district for charges serious enough to warrant immediate arraignment, but minor enough to avoid federal involvement. The resisting arrest and aggressive behavior charges from Andre's case provided the template. His private cell phone rang. The caller ID showed his college roommate from Harvard, Judge Elena Vance, Circuit Court. "Elena, I didn't expect to hear from you this late." "Damon, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Are you building a case against Arthur Pierce?" Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. "Why would you ask that?" "Because his name came up in a very quiet conversation at the judicial conference last week. Someone mentioned unusual activity in prosecutor records requests, specifically sentencing data from his district." Damon chose his words carefully. If, hypothetically, someone were investigating systematic judicial bias, what would your advice be? Elena's sigh carried the weight of 20 years on the bench. "My advice would be to be very, very careful. Pierce has powerful friends. But Damon, if someone were hypothetically building such a case, they'd have my full support. What he's been doing, it's destroying faith in the entire system. Hypothetically speaking, of course." "Of course." After hanging up, Damon opened his secure email and composed a message to his most trusted deputy. "Leah, I need you to clear your calendar for Friday morning. Emergency federal civil rights consultation. Tell no one. And Leah, if something happens to me Thursday, you're acting as lead prosecutor until further notice." He encrypted the message and hit send. On his desk, Andre's case file lay open next to Damon's official prosecutor credentials. Two paths diverged in the yellow wood of justice, and Damon was about to take the one that would make all the difference. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Mike, it's Damon Hayes. I need a favor. A big one." The conference room on the 8th floor of the federal building had seen its share of watershed moments, civil rights violations, corruption scandals, judicial misconduct cases that reshaped entire districts. But the atmosphere this Wednesday morning carried a different weight, the electric tension of a reckoning 15 years in the making. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the state's leading expert in judicial statistics, spread her charts across the mahogany table like a prosecutor laying out murder weapons. Each graph told the same story with mathematical precision. Systematic racial bias elevated to an art form. "Gentlemen, ladies," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "In 30 years of analyzing judicial patterns, I have never encountered disparities this severe." The room held its breath. Present were representatives from the State Judicial Board, the Attorney General's Office, and 3 federal civil rights investigators who had driven up from Atlanta the night before. Judge Arthur Pierce's sentencing patterns show a 42% disparity in average sentence length between black and white defendants for identical crimes with comparable criminal histories. Dr. Reed's laser pointer traced the red line across her projection screen. For context, the average statewide disparity is 12%, which is itself considered problematic. Board Chairman Robert Shaw, a veteran of 40 years in legal administration, leaned forward. Dr. Reed, what's the margin of error in your analysis? Less than 2%. I ran the numbers 4 separate times using different methodologies. The pattern is consistent across all crime categories, all sentence types, and all demographic factors except race. The federal investigator, Agent Isabella Cruz, consulted her notes. Doctor, can you walk us through specific case comparisons? Dr. Reed clicked to the next slide. 2 photos appeared side by side. Kevin Jones, age 19, and Evan Miller, age 20. Both defendants were charged with assault in the 3rd degree. Both first-time offenders. Both represented by experienced public defenders. Both cases occurred within 6 weeks of each other. She clicked again. Court documents filled the screen. Jones, 18 months county jail, 2 years probation, mandatory anger management classes. Miller, 6 months probation, community service, voluntary counseling. A murmur rippled through the room. That's just one example. I documented 47 similar comparisons. The pattern never varies. Black defendants receive systematically harsher sentences for identical crimes. Shaw shifted uncomfortably. What about mitigating factors? Character witnesses, employment history, family circumstances? I controlled for all variables. In fact, many of the black defendants had superior educational backgrounds and employment records compared to their white counterparts who received lighter sentences. Dr. Reed advanced to her next slide, a timeline spanning 15 years. The pattern began immediately after Pierce took the bench and has remained consistent throughout his tenure. We're not talking about unconscious bias or occasional lapses in judgment. This represents systematic, intentional discrimination. Agent Cruz made a note. Doctor, did you analyze plea bargain patterns? Excellent question. Black defendants in Pierce's district are 38% more likely to reject plea deals and proceed to trial. When I interviewed public defenders, the reason became clear. Pierce's plea conferences are so hostile toward black defendants that attorneys advise their clients to take their chances with a jury. A new voice spoke from the back of the room. What about appellate reversals? Doctor, Reed turned toward Assistant Attorney General Brenda Clark. That's perhaps the most disturbing finding. Pierce's sentences are rarely appealed because most defendants can't afford the process, and those that are appealed face an uphill battle. The appellate court gives tremendous deference to judicial discretion in sentencing. She clicked to a new chart showing appellate outcomes. Of the 18 successful appeals of Pierce's sentences, 16 involved white defendants, 2 involved black defendants, and both were overturned on procedural grounds, not sentencing disparities. The room fell silent, except for the soft scratch of pens on legal pads. Shaw cleared his throat. Dr. Reed, are you prepared to testify to these findings under oath? Absolutely, but there's more. Dr. Reed opened a thick binder and withdrew audio equipment. 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by Sophia Rossi, Judge Pierce's former court reporter. She provided these recordings, made during private chamber conferences over the past 2 years. She pressed play. Pierce's voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable. These people think they can waltz into my courtroom and demand special treatment. My grandfather didn't fight in World War II, so these criminals could lecture me about fairness. The recording continued. Chamber conversations revealing casual racism, deliberate sentence enhancements for black defendants, and explicit instructions to court staff about maintaining proper courtroom decorum when dealing with black families. In one particularly damning exchange, Pierce could be heard telling his clerk, "Schedule the Bell sentencing for Thursday afternoon. I want him to sit in jail over the weekend thinking about his choices before I send him upstate." Agent Cruz stopped taking notes and started recording the session on her phone. The final recording was the most devastating. Pierce speaking to his law clerk about the Andrews case. "The public defender wants probation for this punk. Claims he's a college student. I don't care if he graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. Put him away for 2 years. Maybe his friends will learn something." Dr. Reed turned off the recorder. The defendant in question, Kyle Andrews, had no prior record, was working 2 jobs to pay for college, and was caught with less than 2 grams of marijuana. An identical case involving a white defendant from the suburbs resulted in diversion to drug court. Shaw rubbed his temples. "How many recordings are there?" 47 hours of audio spanning 18 months. Ms. Rossi documented everything after Pierce berated her for being too friendly with black attorneys. The federal investigator leaned forward. "Where is Ms. Rossi now?" "Transferred to Judge Vance's court 6 months ago. She's prepared to testify, but she's terrified. Pierce destroyed 2 previous court reporters who crossed him." Assistant Attorney General Clark opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Dr. Reed, are you aware that Judge Pierce is currently under consideration for promotion to the state appellate court?" "I am now." "The nomination committee meets tomorrow afternoon. If these findings are accurate, we need to move immediately." Dr. Reed gathered her materials. "There's one more thing. I was contacted yesterday by someone in the state prosecutor's office. They're conducting a parallel investigation. I can't reveal details, but I believe additional evidence is forthcoming." Shaw stood abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned. Dr. Reed, I need all your materials delivered to my office within the hour. Agent Cruz, what's the federal government's position?" "We're opening a formal civil rights investigation as of this moment. Judge Pierce's promotion is effectively suspended pending the outcome." As the room emptied, Dr. Reed lingered at the table, staring at her charts and graphs. 15 years of systematic injustice reduced to mathematical certainties and audio evidence. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow morning, Pierce's courtroom. Final evidence being delivered. Thank you for your courage. A friend of justice." Dr. Reed deleted the message and gathered her materials. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the federal building, and the first drops of rain began to fall against the windows. Justice, she reflected, often arrived with thunder. The courthouse clock struck 11:30 as Pierce's gavel finished echoing through the marble chamber. Damon Hayes stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, absorbing the weight of 60 days in county jail for what amounted to a traffic violation. "Court is adjourned," Pierce announced, already reaching for his next file, the power rush of crushing another uppity defendant still coursing through his veins. "Bailiff, remove the defendant." But Damon didn't move. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that cut through the courtroom chatter like a blade. "I request permission to address the court." Pierce's head snapped up, his face flushing crimson. "The defendant has been sentenced. This matter is closed. Bailiff, remove this man immediately." "Your Honor," Damon repeated, louder now. "I am Damon Hayes, lead prosecutor for the state of Georgia Special Crimes Division." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Court clerks froze at their desks. The bailiff's hand hovered over his handcuffs, uncertain whether to proceed. Pierce's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "What? What did you say?" Damon reached into his jacket and withdrew his official credentials. The gold badge caught the overhead lights as he held it high enough for everyone to see. Damon Hayes, lead prosecutor. Badge number 47291. I have served in this capacity for 15 years. The color drained from Pierce's face so quickly, he appeared to age 10 years in 10 seconds. His hands began to tremble as the magnitude of what he'd just done crashed over him like a tsunami. This is some kind of joke, Pierce stammered, gripping the edge of his bench. You can't be... you're the defendant. I was arrested for driving while black in your district, Your Honor. Something I orchestrated specifically to experience your systematic bias firsthand. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Attorneys whispered urgently to each other. The bailiff looked between Damon and Pierce like a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. Damon opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. For the record, Your Honor, I have been conducting an official investigation into systematic judicial misconduct in this district for the past 6 months. This morning's proceedings represent the final piece of evidence in a comprehensive case documenting 15 years of racially biased sentencing practices. Pierce's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. You entrapped me. I exposed you. Damon's voice remained perfectly calm, a stark contrast to Pierce's growing panic. Every word you spoke, every gesture you made, every assumption you revealed about my character based solely on my appearance, it's all part of the official record now. The judge's clerk, a young white woman named Sarah, stared at Damon with dawning recognition. She'd seen him before, not as a defendant, but in the prosecutor's parking garage, entering the building through the secure entrance reserved for senior staff. Your Honor, Damon continued, I need to inform you that as of this moment, you are under formal investigation by the State Judicial Board, the Federal Civil Rights Division, and the Attorney General's Office for systematic violation of defendants' constitutional rights. Pierce tried to regain his composure, straightening in his chair. This is highly irregular. You can't just... there are proper channels. The proper channels have been exhausted for 15 years while you destroyed lives and perverted justice. Today, the proper channels found you. Damon turned to address the packed courtroom gallery, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention in much larger venues. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, my name is Damon Hayes. I serve as lead prosecutor for special crimes, with jurisdiction over civil rights violations, judicial misconduct, and systematic abuse of power. This morning's proceedings were conducted under the authority of the State Attorney General's Office as part of a comprehensive investigation. A reporter from Channel 7 stood up. Mr. Hayes, are you saying you deliberately got yourself arrested? I'm saying I provided Judge Pierce with the opportunity to demonstrate the same bias he's shown toward hundreds of black defendants over the past 15 years. The only difference is that today, the defendant had the resources to fight back. Pierce made one last desperate attempt to salvage his authority. This court does not recognize these irregular proceedings. Bailiff, clear my courtroom immediately. But the bailiff remained motionless, staring at Damon's prosecutor credentials with the expression of a man realizing he'd been watching history unfold without knowing it. Damon smiled for the first time that morning. Your Honor, you no longer have the authority to clear anything. As of 11:45 a.m., you are suspended from judicial duties pending the outcome of our investigation. The gavel fell from Pierce's nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. The transformation in the courtroom was electric. Damon Hayes stood at the defendant's table, but his posture had shifted completely. Gone was the submissive stance of the accused. In its place stood the commanding presence of Georgia's most accomplished prosecutor. For the record, Damon announced, his voice filling every corner of the chamber, The state of Georgia hereby files formal charges of judicial misconduct, civil rights violations, and systematic abuse of power against Judge Arthur Pierce. Pierce gripped his gavel like a drowning man clutching driftwood. You can't do this. I am a sitting judge. There are procedures, protocols. There are indeed. Damon opened his briefcase and withdrew a document bearing official state seals. This is an emergency suspension order signed by Chief Justice Anita Sharma at 8:15 this morning. You no longer possess judicial authority in this courtroom or any other. The words hit Pierce like physical blows. His face cycled through shock, rage, and desperation as the reality of his situation crystallized. Furthermore, Damon continued, consulting a second document, this courtroom is now under the jurisdiction of the state prosecutor's office. Bailiff Alvarez, please ensure all recording equipment remains active. Today's proceedings are being documented for federal review. Damon turned towards the gallery, where reporters scribbled frantically and cameras rolled without interruption. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed this morning represents the culmination of 6 months of investigation into systematic racial bias in this judicial district. The traffic stop, the arrest, the charges, all were orchestrated to capture Judge Pierce's discriminatory practices in real time. He gestured towards Pierce, who sat frozen behind the bench like a deer in headlights. Over the past 15 years, Judge Pierce has systematically sentenced black defendants to terms averaging 42% harsher than white defendants for identical crimes. This morning, he demonstrated that same bias by sentencing me to 60 days in jail for violations that typically result in fines or probation. Channel 7's lead reporter stood up. Mr. Hayes, what will happen to Judge Pierce's previous cases? Every sentence he imposed will be reviewed by an independent panel. Defendants who were victims of discriminatory sentencing will have their cases automatically eligible for appeal and potential resentencing. Damon opened his briefcase again and withdrew a thick binder. This contains documented evidence of Judge Pierce's pattern of bias. 47 comparative cases where black and white defendants received drastically different sentences for identical crimes. Statistical analysis showing systematic disparities. Audio recordings of private chambers conferences where Judge Pierce revealed his true motivations. Pierce finally found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. This is entrapment, prosecutorial misconduct. I'll have your badge for this, Hayes. Damon smiled calmly. Your Honor, former Your Honor, entrapment requires law enforcement to induce someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. I simply provided you the opportunity to demonstrate behavior you've exhibited consistently for 15 years. He advanced toward the bench, his prosecutor's instincts taking full control. Would you like me to present specific examples? Kevin Jones, age 19, first offense assault, 18 months county jail. Evan Miller, age 20, identical charges, identical circumstances, 6 months probation. Jordan Bell, college graduate, caught with personal use marijuana, 2 years state prison. Kyle Andrews, same charge, same amount, same lack of priors, diverted to drug court. With each comparison, Pierce seemed to shrink deeper into his chair. The pattern never varies, Judge Pierce. Black defendants get prison. White defendants get second chances. Black families get lectured about moral foundations. White families get compassion about youthful mistakes. Damon reached into his briefcase one final time and withdrew a small digital recorder. But perhaps most damning of all are your own words, recorded during private chamber conferences. He pressed play. Pierce's voice filled the courtroom. These people think they can waltz into my courtroom and demand special treatment. My grandfather didn't fight in World War II, so these criminals could lecture me about fairness. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Pierce's court clerk stared at him with undisguised horror. That recording, Damon announced, along with 46 hours of similar audio, has been submitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation as evidence of systematic civil rights violations under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. paragraph 242. Pierce's lawyer, who had been frantically taking notes, looked up with the expression of someone realizing his client was beyond salvation. "Your Honor," the lawyer began weakly, "my client requests—" "Your client," Damon interrupted, "has no authority to request anything. He is now a defendant in a federal civil rights investigation. His only remaining authority is the right to remain silent, a right I strongly advise him to exercise." The gavel lay on the floor where Pierce had dropped it, a fitting symbol of justice, finally fallen into the right hands. The silence in the courtroom was so complete, you could hear the distant traffic humming outside. Damon Hayes stood at the center of it all, his prosecutor's instincts fully unleashed after months of careful planning and years of watching justice perverted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damon announced, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years prosecuting the state's most complex cases. "What we have witnessed here today represents more than one judge's misconduct. It represents the systematic failure of our justice system to live up to its most fundamental promise, equal treatment under law." He turned toward the press gallery, where every camera focused on his every word. "For 15 years, Judge Arthur Pierce has weaponized the bench against black defendants. Not through overtly racist language, he was too clever for that. Instead, he used coded phrases, manufactured character assessments, and systematic sentence enhancements to ensure that justice in his courtroom was anything but blind." Pierce's attorney, Edward Grant, stood shakily. "Your Honor, Mr. Hayes, this is highly irregular. My client has not been formally charged, has not been read his rights." "Your client," Damon replied without missing a beat, "spent 15 years denying those same rights to hundreds of defendants. But unlike Judge Pierce, we will follow proper procedure." Damon nodded toward the back of the courtroom. The doors opened, and Agent Isabella Cruz from the FBI entered, accompanied by 2 federal marshals and Assistant Attorney General Brenda Clark. "Agent Cruz," Damon announced, "please present the federal charges." Cruz stepped forward, consulting an official document. "Arthur Pierce, by the authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Department of Justice, you are hereby charged with conspiracy to deprive persons of their civil rights under color of law, in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. The words echoed through the chamber like gunshots. Pierce's face had gone completely white, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Furthermore," Cruz continued, "you are charged with systematic abuse of judicial authority, violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and conspiracy to deny due process rights to defendants based on race." Pierce tried to speak, but only a strangled whisper emerged. Assistant Attorney General Clark stepped forward. "Mr. Pierce, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you." The irony was overwhelming. The man who had denied fairness to hundreds was now being afforded every protection he had systematically denied others. Damon addressed the courtroom one final time as the lead prosecutor. "The evidence against Judge Pierce is overwhelming and undeniable. 6 months of investigation, 47 hours of recorded conversations, statistical analysis showing systematic bias, and now today's demonstration of that bias applied to a sitting prosecutor." He gestured toward the stack of evidence boxes that federal agents were now cataloging. "Every case Judge Pierce handled will be reviewed by independent counsel. Every defendant who was a victim of his discriminatory sentencing will have their case reviewed for potential resentencing or dismissal. This is not just about one corrupt judge. This is about restoring faith in our justice system. Channel 11's courthouse reporter stood up. Mr. Hayes, what will happen to Judge Pierce's appellate court nomination? Damon smiled grimly. As of 1 hour ago, that nomination was officially withdrawn. Judge Pierce will never sit on a judicial bench again. The federal marshals stepped forward. Mr. Pierce, please stand and place your hands behind your back. The transformation was complete. The man who had ruled his courtroom like a medieval lord was now being handcuffed in the very chamber where he had destroyed so many lives. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Pierce finally found his voice. This is a witch hunt. I was tough on crime. I maintained order. I did what the community expected. You did what your prejudices demanded, Damon interrupted. And now you'll face the same justice system you perverted, except you'll receive the due process you denied others. The federal agents began escorting Pierce toward the side door. As they passed Damon, the disgraced judge looked directly at him. I should have known, Pierce whispered, his voice filled with bitter recognition. You were too calm, too composed. Real defendants break under pressure. Damon met his gaze steadily. Real prosecutors don't break at all, Your Honor. We just build better cases. As Pierce disappeared through the door, Damon turned to address the remaining crowd. Today, justice won not because one prosecutor exposed one corrupt judge, but because our system, ultimately, worked. When institutions fail, individuals must step forward. When the powerful abuse their authority, the powerless must find ways to hold them accountable. The gallery erupted in applause, but Damon raised his hand for silence. This victory belongs to every defendant who suffered under Judge Pierce's bias, to every family torn apart by his prejudice, to every attorney who fought uphill battles in his courtroom, to every person who believes that justice should actually be blind. He gathered his materials and walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused and looked back at the empty judge's bench. 15 years of systematic injustice ends today. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding trust. The gavel remained on the floor where Pierce had dropped it. Damon left it there. Some symbols, he reflected, were more powerful when broken. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Attorney General's office on the 15th floor. Damon Hayes adjusted his new nameplate, Deputy Attorney General Civil Rights Division, and smiled at the irony. The man who had been sentenced to 60 days in jail was now the state's top prosecutor for civil rights violations. The transformation had been swift and decisive. Judge Arthur Pierce was serving 18 months in federal prison, the same facility where many of his victims had been unjustly incarcerated. His law license revoked, his pension stripped, his reputation destroyed so completely that even his country club had quietly revoked his membership. The Pierce precedent, as law schools now called it, had revolutionized prosecutorial tactics nationwide. 17 states had adopted the Hayes Protocol, systematic investigations of judicial bias using statistical analysis, recorded evidence, and, when necessary, first-hand documentation of discriminatory practices. Damon opened his laptop and scrolled through the morning's case updates. 43 defendants had been resentenced after independent review. Jordan Bell was completing his college degree, his conviction overturned entirely. Kevin Jones had received a gubernatorial pardon and was now studying law himself, inspired by Damon's example. The knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Leah Cohen entered, carrying a thick folder. "Boss, the Georgia Supreme Court just ruled on the Andrews case, complete reversal, with language specifically citing systematic judicial bias. Kyle Andrews' record is wiped clean." Damon nodded, but his satisfaction was tempered by reality. "How many more cases are we reviewing?" 437 pending, with more being identified daily. The statistical team found patterns going back to Pierce's first week on the bench. 437 lives damaged by one man's prejudice. The number still staggered him. His secure phone buzzed with a text from FBI agent Cruz. Pierce's appeal denied. The Federal Circuit Court upheld all convictions. Justice served. Damon smiled and forwarded the message to Dr. Evelyn Reed, whose statistical analysis had provided the foundation for everything that followed. Her response came back immediately. 1 down, too many more to go. Ready for the next case when you are. The next case. Because Pierce wasn't unique, he was just the first to be exposed using these methods. 3 other judges were now under investigation using the Hayes Protocol. The systematic nature of judicial bias was being revealed courthouse by courthouse, district by district. Damon stood and walked to his window, looking down at the courthouse where it all began. A new judge, Nicole Washington, a young black woman with impeccable credentials, now presided over Pierce's former courtroom. Early reports suggested a dramatic shift toward fairness and equality. His phone chimed with a news alert. Hayes Protocol adopted in federal courts nationwide. The article described how his innovative investigation techniques were being implemented across the justice system, creating accountability where none had existed before. Damon picked up his phone and scrolled to his contacts. Time to record the video his staff had been requesting for weeks. Good evening. I'm Damon Hayes, Deputy Attorney General for Civil Rights. 6 months ago, I walked into a courtroom as a defendant and exposed 15 years of systematic racism disguised as justice. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that justice requires courage from all of us, then share it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories where the system works because people make it work. And remember, when institutions fail, individuals must rise. He smiled at the camera. Justice isn't just blind, it's vigilant.